So let me just report on the fuels and transportation breakout session. We had a group of about 8 to 10 people. We had a very good discussion. We began with, I talked a little bit about some of the Stanford technologies that we've developed in this area. And then Swaroop covered, he covered the materials challenges associated with fuels and also the potential drivers for changes in transportation. And so after that, we then had a real lively discussion. And so we're going to summarize this. And first I'm going to pass it over to Swaroop, who will talk about the discussion we had on fuels and engines.
Thank you, Richard. Yes. See, the group felt, in terms of the fuels, okay, they prefer a distributed fuels, okay, distributed plants. And they felt not one fuel will do. We need to have multiple fuel strategy. And multiple fuels in terms of, biomass to liquid, coal to liquid, depending on what is available at that place. Diesel, main option. Electricity, wherever, we need to have hybrid cars also. Then CNG, LNG. I mean, try to maximize, the use of CNG, LNG. Then petrol or gasoline as it is. People felt DME should be, pushed, okay, as a, alternative. Until it develops, others could be there, and DME should, take over the role much more. And then second generation biofuels, then auto LPG wherever it could be available, and then biogas, again where it is available, especially in the rural areas. So they felt, to give the power to this for these ones, again we should look after, look for a technology which gives you the distributed plants, okay, based on either a biomass or a coal, so that what it will be, it should be, preferably taking the local resources into consideration. And if you get a grid or if you get other options, then it is better. But we need to, think more on, distributed plant rather than a centralized plant, So by this, what you are going to do is you are going to reduce the transportation cost, especially associated with the diesel or a petrol transportation. And secondly, you reduce the energy footprint, which could be a good thing. And at the same time, since you are going to make a localized, resources, this one, people ownership becomes more. Now what happens, the ownership is, different, they don't identify, so, the prices of feedstock, varying. Once it becomes localized, when they feel it is for their need, everything comes under control. It could be, much better operated. And then we went into, so once you have the fuel available, what are the engines you have and what are the problems you have and how it could be addressed. They felt, we have, every year maybe 10 to 15% new engines come. In new engines, we should drive, high efficiency, soot-less, hybrid strategy, so that, the new comes and takes over the world. In the existing engine, what we should do is, in India especially, we make all kinds of fuels. Fuel is not an issue. BS3, BS4, BS5, we export mostly BS5. In India, we use a lot of BS3 and, BS4. And some of them are, high sulfur, little bit higher sulfur. Okay, so if you can fit up a catalytic converter at the end of the engine, okay, and that can reduce emissions, and that can do a good job. So by that, what will happen? You can, you can have a good control over the climate and other things. Okay, that was another, strategy we felt we should have. And third is, for example, railways and tractors use, especially one type of a diesel, 51 cetane. Okay. Why should they use 51 cetane when, when they require high fuel efficiency is the only criteria, no other criteria is there. So typically, we can, tailor a diesel which could go into this one and they could be supplied that. So you get a, optimized consumption and you can reduce the consumptions far better and have a control over the emissions. Now I request, Richard to take it over.
Okay, so we also, talked about transportation, not just the fuel part of it, but the transportation aspect of it. And we thought about, what is the optimal way of transporting goods across India? Today, it sounds like most of the goods are transported by trucks. But, some of it could go by rail. In many other countries, they do use rail. We thought, well, maybe an opportunity here would be to look at maybe a model that could be used in developing countries that could be developed that would optimize what would be the best transportation arrangement that you would need for moving goods, for moving people, and so on, that could be used as a sort of planning, like a way of thinking how transportation systems should be developed in developing countries. The other thing we also brought up was that, transportation, modeling of transportation, you can't just treat transportation individually. You've got to consider it as part of a bigger energy system. As we started discussing things, you think, what are you transporting? Why are you transporting it? What does it involve? You've got to need fuels. If you have biofuels, where do those biofuels come from? How do you want them from centralized systems versus distributed systems? We don't want to transport them too much. So there was a lot of issues as you try and model transportation systems. You've got to think how they get integrated into other energy systems. As we looked at sort of other research areas, we thought about pollution kits to assess engine pollution. There are no ways right now of sort of, pollution is a very big issue, especially in a country like India. And are there kits that could be developed that could really tell you how much pollution is coming out of engines? We thought that was maybe one opportunity. And then traffic management was something else. I've experienced driving in Mumbai the last couple of days, and I know how traffic is around here. What are sort of traffic management models that perhaps we could develop that would help predict the traffic? Maybe through GPS we can transfer messages. Maybe we can, develop traffic management models. And it wouldn't be just necessarily for the driver, but also maybe systems that you could feed to the government that would be able to coordinate traffic in some sort of way. We didn't really say exactly how it would work, but there could be opportunities in that area as well. So those are some of the opportunities that we identified on the transportation side. And so that sort of summarizes in a couple of slides what we discussed. I'll open it up for questions, but maybe, Swaroop, do you want to say anything? Oh, that's it? Okay, so we'll open it up for questions. Would you?
Actually, a couple of comments. On the transportation, I always wondered, we have so many existing internal combustion engine cars. And the autos always talk about new hybrids of different variety of hybridization. I mean, could we not develop a kit that actually hybridizes existing fleet? Then you can have a much bigger impact. And I just wonder why has that not been done? And could that be an area and opportunity, both business and technology-wise?
We had a good discussion about that, actually. In our panel, we had a discussion about whether we should be, cars in a place like India last for decades. And so there are new cars coming along and we can come up with new technologies, but another option is to retrofit existing vehicles. And so absolutely, that was one of the ideas that we came up with.
But I don't think it's just for India, it's for the whole world. I mean, there are,
So in India, actually, most of the taxis now, they are fitted with CNG as well as petrol option.
I'm talking about hybridization with electricity. Because I think if you think about, in the Indian context, the driver really doesn't need the 400-mile tank full like in the US. The distances are much shorter for commute. And so some of the transportation modes which are not applicable in other parts of the world, maybe, because our cars are much lighter, they're not as heavier. They're not like assault vehicles we see in other parts. They're nano cars. And maybe there are other technologies which are actually amenable for these kinds of things. And I think in terms of electrical hybridization of internal combustion engine, not just alternate LPG or CNG. On the fuel side, I have a comment because this is really driven by the autos, and autos are trying to do a common fuel standard for the world. I mean, they have been somehow got this idea that if you have a common fuel standard for the world, then their problem is solved. And the problem is, the weather in different parts of the countries and worlds are different. And I never understood why India would adopt Euro 4 standards or whatever. It doesn't make sense at all. I mean, for diesel, for instance, the T95 point could be much higher. It's not as cold a country, don't have a freezing point and those kinds of issues. That actually opens up a whole variety of opportunities in terms of availability of fuels. And I think there's something probably the auto oil has to work together to figure this out. But these are the kinds of issues which are not technology probably, or more policy. But I think the technology issue could be that you actually, since you talked about fuel which are fit for purpose for a given transportation mode, even for a given fuel, you could more harmonize the standards which are driven more by fuel efficiency in an overall context. So.
That's
Very good point.
yeah.
And by the way, the sulfur, I mean, I thought yesterday I heard more
Sulfur
sulfur you
is
put
good
out has a
asset,
good
yeah.
effect on climate change. So,
Reducing the temperature. Yeah. Ashok, you want to say something? Ashok, you want to say just repeat.
Okay.
Ashok would, yeah, he's our expert on the fuel and he's working along with the.
I think Ajit, you said a very valid point. But then what had happened when Dr. Mashelkar wrote the auto fuel policy? We were under tremendous pressure by the Supreme Court of India. And unfortunately at that time, the only norms that we had was European norms. So I have no hesitation in saying it was just copied.
Yeah.
With minor tinkering here or there. Now the next committee, which is Professor Soumitra Chaudhary, Member Planning Commission, and this time we are a little more blessed with data. We have source apportionment data. And we can probably look at the experience of Japanese. You rightly said, in Japan, nobody looks at, there is consensus that sulfur needs to be lowered in fuels. But you need not have the distillation T95, as you rightly said. It will go in the heavy fuel oil pool. So there has to be India-centric, or developing countries have to look at what's good for their country and optimize accordingly. Yeah?
One question here and then one back here.
one of the fastest selling item in rural India are the two-wheelers besides the mobile phones. Two-wheelers, if you look at them, 90% of the time they are just standing. If there can be a hybrid two-wheeler developed, they can not only run, but they can also produce power. And most of these people who are in the huts, they have two-wheelers. How they got it, it's a long story. And that can produce a lot of power for producing electricity for a lot of things. So hybridization of two-wheeler is an extremely important thing, because not only that, it will also improve the fuel efficiency of the two-wheelers, which on the poor roads and etc. can.
Yeah, that's a very innovative idea, in fact, they use that kind of an engine. If you see some of the villages, they have a tricycle in which they fit this and then they transport the local transport, especially if you go into Gujarat and Maharashtra interior, you'll find that kind of, they call it as a fatfati, okay? Just, bullet engine, which is there, you pull it out and then it runs on that.
But producing a hybrid is not an easy task in a small space. So that's something which is really a game-changing technology.
Over here.
There are three things in this, perhaps it's been highlighted in the breakout sessions, but some of the three things are not very clearly articulated out. Firstly was that India had a very good waterways-based transportation system when the British were ruling India. And for various reasons, perhaps due to the partition of India and things like that, it was done away with. That has not been perhaps explored in these slides. Point number two is an idea which is gaining vogue in the United States, is using LNG for dedicated freight routes, especially for railways and heavy trucking. It's simple economics. Today, with a crude price of $105 a barrel and a crack of roughly $15, diesel for the railway engines costs more than $125 to $140 a barrel. Even if I import LNG at current prices and I deliver it at UP or wherever, and I landed cost just $22 per MMBTU, which in oil terms is just about barely $105 a barrel. Which means straight I get a saving of $20 a barrel. And these are dedicated routes, and there is lesser pollution, and I'm pretty sure there would be some safety issues would be resolved. Third thing is third thing which is also, perhaps it is there, is not coming out clearly, is the attitudes are in young consumers. For a young consumer, the primary object of possession is his mobile phone and perhaps some kind of a tablet. A car is increasingly, because of its parking and other headaches. I read in The Economist somewhere that Paris has a system where you can basically hire a car at any given point in time. I've forgotten the name of that company. And second is, you're also using a lot of software for carpooling. So I would like to have your views on these three: waterways, LNG for dedicated routes, the hire car system which is there in Paris, which is supposed to be copied in other nations, and using of a mobile phone for carpooling.
Okay, I can talk a little bit about a couple of those. So we have a company, for example, at Stanford called Zipcar, and you can rent a car by the hour, and yes, you can rent it at one place and drop it off to another. There's also all sorts of car sharing companies, and yes, you use your phone, an app on the phone to actually share rides and share cars. And this whole business model, it's not clear what's going to be the ones that are going to succeed. It could work. I mean, I'm not the expert of how it could work in a place like India, in the developing world. But you're right. I mean, as I see, there's such a high penetration of mobile phone use here. There are opportunities, there are potentially, I believe, opportunities where you could integrate that use together with car sharing, ride sharing, and so on, to sort of have a more efficient, effective transportation system. I think sort of when we talked about traffic management models, that would fall into that sort of category. So, but I think it's well worth exploring.
Sorry,
Okay. One more question.
Hi, my name is PJ Tay. I'm from the Singapore Economic Development Board. I just had two quick comments. The first one is addressing Ajit's question about a hybrid kit. If I'm not wrong, KPIT Commons in Pune actually has produced a kit to actually hybridize existing cars. So that could be something to explore. The second point is on the traffic management models. I'm actually based here in Mumbai, and I have been stuck in Mumbai traffic enough to realize that a large part of the problem actually, while Mumbai traffic is a self-regulating complex system for the most part, there are times when at traffic junctions when the traffic lights fail that you will have all four directions coming in at the same time. So just to share an anecdote, I was talking to my driver who was a former driving instructor here. I asked him, do you have things like right of way and all this? And he said, yeah, technically, yes. But in practice, it doesn't happen that way. So it could be a case of education or re-education of existing drivers on Mumbai's roads that might actually just solve a lot of the problems straight away, in addition to the other technical things that you propose. Yeah, just my 2 points.
Just a comment.
Okay.
There is a report on waterways where a scientific committee to the Prime Minister, when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. That report exists. So wanted I can maybe get it for you.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent job.